Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reading Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and I just want to say I'm really glad I read this in my adulthood because if I think I read it as a kid, it'd probably be like a pretty good book, but reading it as an adult is definitely a 5 out of 5. My Booktuber shout today goes out to the Dragon Army book. I'll link his specific video down below for Ender's Game because he calls it his love letter to Ender's Game. He said that this book ignited his passion for sci-fi and reading, and he tries to reread this book every few years, which I think is really great. I don't think I'll reread it every few years, but I do have to say, if you watch my channel, I always say that I'm not really into sci-fi, but I will say that I feel that this book has ignited my openness to exploring more sci-fi. And as always, before I go into my full book review, I always appreciate it if you can please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and if you have read Ender's Game, please comment down below what you thought of this book, what age did you read it, what impact it had on you, and if you have read the other books in the Ender'S. One of the reasons why I think this book has such a big impact on me is I am amazed it was published in 1985. However, this copy have actually since 1977, but when I looked into it, it actually came out in 1985. I think perhaps maybe is based off a short story that Orson Scott Card wrote, and maybe that was in 1977, but the actual published date for this is 1985, and the genre, as I mentioned before, is sci-fi. Orson Scott Card is an American author, and he actually started his writing career in screenplay, and he led to short stories, and now he is a prolific sci-fi author. Him starting his career in screenplay really shows in this book, at least for me, because I feel this book is very high action, and the way he describes the training battle scenes feels very much like a movie, so I can definitely see that part of his previous career that led to this book. As I mentioned, he's a very prolific writer, so if you enjoy Ender's Game, I'm curious if you've read the rest of the series, because according to the back of this book, there are 5 other books for a total of 6 in the Ender'S. And then also, if you go to the first page of this book, there's literally like dozens of other books and series he's written. He primarily focuses on sci-fi, but he's also a Mormon literature writer, which I thought was a fun fact to learn about him. As I mentioned, he does Mormon literature, so he is a practicing active member of the LDS Mormon Church. Him and his wife had 5 kids. One of them actually unfortunately died when they were 18 due to cerebral palsy, and he also had a daughter that died the day she was born. So he actually has a short story called Lost Boys, which is highly, people call it autobiographical of his own life, and it also features a death of a fictional child. So I thought that was like a neat thing to learn about him, and I guess if you want to know more about him personally, he's written a short story that's kind of about his life. I will say I'm super excited to read his other books in this series, the Ender'S, and also Maid. Check out his other books. I don't want to put myself too much into a pigeonhole reading just one genre all the time, but I might do a bit of like maybe a sci-fi April, who knows. But a lot of his fiction, he has like a trope where it features characters with exceptional gifts who have to make difficult choices that are high stakes, and sometimes, especially in this book, these characters who is a child is also often exploited by adults, which I thought is a very interesting like moral conundrum to experience. A bit about the story and how it starts. I do think this book is worth reading even if you're not a sci-fi fan, because I wasn't, and I feel like I've converted now, and I feel like this is one of those classic books that I always heard about growing up but I just never read, but it's like a pretty like quick and easy read. So the story starts with, we live in this world, I assume it's the future in some time, and there was this invasion by this alien species that the book calls the buggers, and there was a first invasion and a second invasion, and now we're preparing, like humankind's preparing for the third invasion, but to prepare for it, they want to like get ahead of it by attacking first. So basically in this world, they train kids at a very young age who are selected to the battle school, and any kids who stand out has the chance to be a commander. And of course in this book, it's called Ender's Game. Ender is kind of like the chosen one, which is the trope that's used in this book. Ender has an interesting upbringing. He is the third of 3 children, and in this future dystopian world, you're only allowed to have 2 kids, and Ender is the third. So he kind of has this kind of like, I guess like, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Like he kind of has like this like like chip on his shoulder that he's the third child and he's not supposed to exist. So he has his two siblings, Valentine and Peter, and Valentine is the sister. She's very empathetic, very caring, kind of seen as like the meek character. And there's Peter, who's the complete opposite, who's like violent and angry and can't control himself. And with Ender, who's intelligent, and he's kind of like the in-between and the balance of both of Peter and Valentine. So Ender is selected to go to battle school at a very young age, like 6. And usually kids train until they're 16, but Ender is very quickly isolated from his peers, and he has a suspicion his teachers are doing it on purpose, but by doing so, he excels in his studies and his training and his battle training, and he kind of moves up to be a commander very quickly, and that's the premise of the book. Other thing I want to mention about the book, it's kind of like a side story, which I'm sure it'll become more prolific later in the series, is one thing that blew my mind about this book, because it came out in 1985, is back in 1985, for all you young people out there, there wasn't the worldwide web of the internet that we have nowadays. And in this book, there is a side story where two characters have this foresight to take advantage of this thing called the net, to write columns and write ideas and write discussions to try to change the opinion and the trajectory of world order and the way that people see how the world should be. And I thought that was really crazy that this was touched on in this book, because I feel like in 1985 the internet didn't exist the way it did now, but Orson Scott Card had this foresight or this prediction, and not only did he predict that it's a thing nowadays, you could argue, but now it's even faster than you can imagine. So that part of the book really blew my mind, and it really elevated my review to a 5. Common themes in this book, probably no surprise to you. The first one is the idea of warfare. Why do we go to war? Is it okay to kill others just because they're hurting us? Is maybe there's a lack of communication, or is it like do two wrongs make a right? Very interesting discussion. Other one, obviously, as I mentioned, that these kids are trained at a very young age. So a common theme is the idea or the moral conflict of, is it right to take these kids' childhood away from them to train them to be these war heroes? I mean, obviously the answer is no, but in this book it kind of talks about that. I thought it was interesting. Other one is the importance of human connection. As I mentioned earlier, Ender is kind of isolated from his peers by his adult teacher, which is really like fucked up. So it's really cool to see how human connection can dictate Ender's character development. Another thing that really stuck with me is there's a line in the book talking about survival first, happiness if we can manage it. And it kind of talks about how, like, you know, I feel very lucky, and if you're watching this, probably very privileged as well, that we live in a society that we can aim for goals and successes and aim to be happy. But for lots of people around the world, even in present day, just being alive is enough, and that's maybe something they will only experience in their whole lifetime, and it's such a privilege to be able to chase happiness. So this book for me really talked about that, really talking about the idea of like war, and how like obviously no one wants war, but I guess if you truly feel threatened by this other enemy, you would go to war so you can protect those around you so they can have happiness in a safe space. I don't know, this book really made me think about the idea of war very differently and why people do it. Obviously, I know nowadays war is usually driven by a power-hungry person behind it, but you know, in some cases, people truly do go to war because they truly feel their homeland is threatened. So I thought that's a very interesting discussion that brought to my mind while reading this book. Even though I gave this book a 5, obviously there are always things you can find to not like in a book. It's not a perfect book. So the one thing for me, which I mentioned earlier, is Orson Scott Card is a screenwriter first, so the book is very like action driven, very movie paced, so it's very fast paced, which I think a lot of readers really enjoy. However, for me, I would have liked it more if there was more backstory and fleshing out of all the characters. There are lots of side characters that are there for Ender's journey. I like to know more about them and what led them to where they are, so that was lacking for me. But maybe because this is a series, I'll come to learn more about these side characters' background later on. And then another thing that was like a negative for me, only because I'm just not that interested, is the scenes describing the training battle scenes. For me, it could have just been like they went to battle, paragraph does happen, and that was in conclusion. But for in this book, the battle scenes kind of went like a few pages sometimes, and I understand they're trying to explain the tactics of it and the strategy, but for me, it wasn't that interesting. Things I did enjoy about this book is I don't know if this book is meant for kids or young adult, but I do think because all the characters at first, especially Ender as a child, and I feel like it comes off as a child's book or a young reader's book. So even though I perceive as that, I really enjoyed how there's so many dark moments in this book. It was really surprising for me. It also brought up a lot of like moral conflict, and I think it brings up a lot of discussion of what's right, what's wrong, and is there absolute right, absolute wrong. That was like really interesting for me to read and think about. I really enjoyed the three siblings, Valentine, Peter, and Ender, and how they have very three distinct personalities and temperaments. And I also love the universe that Orson Scott Card created, and I'm really excited to get lost in the Ender'S. The Goodreads rating for this book is 4.31 out of 5, which is super high because this book has been out for such a long time, and I think there's like over like 700,000 reviews that gave it a 5. There were bad reviews, but there was like less than like 4%, which is pretty impressive. Reasons why people didn't like this book is they couldn't finish it. They felt the battle scenes drag. I can agree with that. Some other people thought that the premise of the book is unbelievable, which I can agree with. But I mean, it's sci-fi. You gotta suspend belief, and it's not like a real world. So people didn't like the trope of the chosen one being Ender, this child, and humans suck at war against this other alien species, and like a child can save the day. That's like weird. And also really bad reviews I saw a lot of is I think a lot of people can't separate the art from the artist. And Orson Scott Card, as I mentioned earlier, he's Mormon, which I think some people have huge, don't have a huge, aren't supportive of organized religion. And I think in the past he has said some homophobic things and also alludes to he thinks women's a weaker sex. So I think some people who cannot separate artists from the art would not enjoy his work no matter what he wrote, which is fair. They are allowed to have that, make that choice and that decision. So yeah, those were the bad reviews. The good reviews on Goodreads is for a lot of people, this was either their first book they've read. Obviously, aside from children's book, it was their first sci-fi book, and it just jumped them into the world of sci-fi, and they got really sucked in. And I can actually surprisingly relate to that because it's a sci-fi book, one of my first sci-fi books, and I really enjoy it. And similar to me, a lot of people love how this book can provoke a lot of discussion about what it means to be human, to be a child, about warfare. And even though in this book they are going against an alien species across the galaxy, you can really bring that conflict into our world nowadays when it comes to conflict between nations, which is crazy because we're all the same species on Earth. Why I think you should read this book. I think you should read it if you like sci-fi, if you want to get lost into a series, because there are 6 books in the series. And I think also it'd be fun to read this book because a movie adaptation came out in 2013. I already know based on reading this book, there's no way that a movie is going to be good. However, the main actor from Sex Education, I forgot his name, is in this movie, and I think he's a fun actor, and I always like to see how people do their best to translate a world that's made up into reality on the big screen. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if you ask me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what happened in this book, but I'll always remember how it made me feel after I finished the book. So this book, Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, it made me feel in awe of the power of writing, because I felt like this book, it's not a long read, and he created this universe so effortlessly, and I just got lost in it. And not only in awe of power of writing for this book, but also within this book, there is a plot between Valentine and Peter where they use the power of their words on the net to also control and push people's opinions in the world. So it's just amazing to me how powerful writing and words can be, and it's just amazing. Thank you for watching until the end of my book review for Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. If you read this book, please let me know what you thought down below, and if you read any of the other books in the series, Please let me know if it's worth reading. If you want to join me next time, I'm reading The Maid by Nita Prose. This is for an in-person book club with my colleagues, so it should be fun to see the discussion that comes from that. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!